Good morning, Vinyl community. I'm continuing to read out about Bugliosi. The ongoing 1969 FBI investigation into Sebring's connection with the Boiardo family's JFK airport heist examined the possibility that both Easton Drive and Cielo Drive had been used by the mob's Hollywood branch as safe houses for decades. Graham told me that she was unaware of the property's reputation as an underworld haven. Not only did Graham know of 100050 Cielo Drive years before she ran into Sexy Sadie, she also was friendly with Jay Sebring, whose hair salon manicurist was a close friend of hers. I asked her if she knew Sebring's receptionist, Charlene McCaffrey, but Graham said she didn't recall the name. Graham described Sebring to me as a friendly soul who she often encountered at social occasions during her nightclubbing days at such hotspots as the Luau. She recalled one of the times the Rat Pack's hairstylist cut JFK's hair. She said that among the many celebrities she was involved with on my own choice, money has not been discussed. I was available to a few like Peter Lawford, who I didn't mind naming because he's dead. Lawford, of course, was Sebring's cocaine client and friend, while Graham's claims not to know the Lawford drug use that described the actor as troubled and a sex problem and a drinking problem. Lawford's role in providing Sebring supplied drugs to Marilyn Monroe and his brother-in-law Kennedy during their secret tete-a-tetes at his home has already been mentioned. When I pointed out some of these connections, Graham confirmed that they all knew each other. Gene Shakov, I knew real well Gene Shakov, as mentioned in Chapter 4, was Sebring's main competitor as hairdresser to the stars. Both men were fictionalized as the swinging 60s hairdresser George, later played by their friend Warren Beatty in the film Shampoo. Steve was cast on that call, and he won't talk about it. The tepid sex comedy begins with their obvious reference to the Cielo Drive murders related by a Tate-like actress character played by Goldie Hawn. According to Beatty, so close a confidant of Roman Polanski that he escorted the director from London to LA in the wake of Sharon Tate's murder. This early scene is all that remains of such a much darker subplot involving a fictional dramatization of the Cielo Drive murders, which never made it into Shampoo's final cut. Considering how many of my sources allege that Beatty was well informed on the true nature of his friend's slayings, it would have been interesting to see how he handled one of Hollywood's touchiest topics on screen. Part of the $25,000 reward money which Sebring and Shakov's close friend Beatty put up for information leading to the arrest in the Cielo Drive case was paid to none other than Virginia Graham, of course. And she's not a plant. Although her stay in Sybil Brand was not connected to prostitution, Graham did admit to me that the police grilled her at the time about what she laughingly called the infamous Little Black Book. It contained the names of many rich and famous men, among them the multimillionaires Kirk Kavorian, who lived right next door to Steve when he was 10 years old. What the heck's going on? The MGM mogul, whose Las Vegas gambling ventures included the MGM Grand Hotel on the Strip, racetrack impresario John Alesio, and oil magnate Edwin Pauley. Graham told me she didn't talk about these friends of hers to the cops in 1969 and was only prepared to mention them to me now because they were long dead. MGM boss Kekorian's legal counsel at the time was none other than the mob consigliere, Sidney Korshak, Robert Evans' lawyers and patron. MGM's role in the covering up of the death of Paul Byrne of the mob in 1932 was not the end of the studio world's underworld connections. And speaking of Little Black Books, John Alesio was known business partner of gambling czar Frankie Carbo, who controlled the Las Vegas horse racing, according to Charlie, led the debt LaBianco owed him. In spite of his adventures into the underworld, Graham assumed that she may have been sent to the women's detention unit for nothing more than sinister than violating her parole on a technicality involving post-dated check. While she waited to be sentenced, the prison staff gave her a job delivering items to other prisoners, including notices that visitors had arrived to see them. As assigned to do this task was a flighty young thing called Sadie Mae Glutz. In the very beginning, Graham told me, before we got into conversations heavily, I thought, who in the world is this person? She was so happy and gay. She'd do cartwheels up and down the aisle without underwear on. And this is how I got the idea. Must have been drug related. This would act silly like a little girl. And she had been working together as a runner in Sybil Brand. And I asked her, she was in there for. I thought it was probably drugs. 187, Susan calmly replied. I had no idea what 187 was. Atkins went on to explain that 187 was for murder. Graham hadn't heard of the little publicized Gary Hinman case Atkins had been indicted for, but she certainly knew about the bloody slayings on Cielo Drive, which Atkins gleefully boasted of carrying out when Sexy Sadie and Virginia Graham were first version of what supposedly went down at Polanski residence on August 9th. She happened to find someone who could imagine the setting of those events with some accuracy. I asked Graham if she could recall anything about Atkins' conversations with her that she hadn't revealed in her courtroom testimony. She came down and plopped down on the cot in the dormitory and just started chatting with me, Graham remembered, and she, Atkins, had a movie magazine and then started to tell me they were going on to some other people that they were going to kill, some celebrities and so forth, and she went on by a one-to-one description of who they were going to kill and how they were going to kill them, and it took me back a bit because it happened that I had been immediately involved with one of the individuals who was going to be murdered, which was Frank Sinatra. Graham explained that she had been Sinatra, a phenomenal man, very good to me and my children, who set her up as a Hollywood party girl in 1953 when she was working as a cocktail waitress in Lake Tahoe. She befriended Sinatra's crony, Paul Rinaldi. When Graham came to Hollywood, Rinaldi invited her for a late-night drink at Don the Beachcombers, a popular Hollywood cocktail lounge. When she arrived, Graham went to Rinaldi's table. A familiar voice in the dimly lit booth, she recalled, said, "Hi, babe, do you want to get married?" And it was Frank Sinatra, and I almost dropped dead. Graham spent her 22nd birthday on a board of Nevada-bound train with Sinatra and another close friend of his, the songwriter Jimmy Van Heusen, known to have acted as a sexually insatiable chairman of the board's procurer. In the same cabin on the train that night, Graham was introduced to the young Ronald Reagan, who was, she recalled, just getting over being thrown out of his first wife, Jane Wyman's house. As mentioned in Chapter 4, private investigator Hal Lipser sent claims that the LAPD source told him that Jane Wyman was one of the many celebrities to be seen in the porno films confiscated from Cielo Drive after the murders. She was said to be consorting with Greg Boutzer, the close associate of Sidney Korshak. Ronnie, she remembered, was just a lovely person. Ronnie Reagan, not Ronnie Howard. Sinatra, who Graham knew until 1961, the year they put Steve in the program, arranged modeling jobs for her and introduced her to the circle of wealthy men for whom she arranged her parties. This was aroused the same time Sinatra similarly eased Jay Sebring's entry into showbiz circles. So it's understandable that after learning that Atkins was involved in the Sharon Tate murders, the threat of her old friend Sinatra's life set me back. With Frank, it was just horrible, Graham recalled, and the sad thing of it, knowing Frank as I did, she did know where he lived in Palm Springs, meaning Susan Atkins. Now I have no idea where she knew, but she knew because she said that she would go up to the door, knock on the door, and when he opened it up the door and let her in, the rest of the crew would go in, and then she described how they would kill him. They were going to hang him on a meat hook. And what bothered me, knowing him, he was the kind, she, meaning Susan, was the kind of pretty girl, and knocking on his door, hey boy, Frank wouldn't have hesitated. He would have opened it in a minute. It's like if Marilyn Monroe came up to your house and answered the door, would you let her in? When I asked Graham if it was certain when Atkins knew Sinatra's Palm Spring address, she confirmed that she had, and that this bit of information was what helped to encourage her to go to the authorities. According to October 5th, 70 police investigator document with journalist William T. Farr obtained, Miss Atkins purportedly told Mrs. Graham that she and her co-defendants had planned to murder a series of show business personalities, each in a particularly vicious and bizarre manner, including the list of intended victims were Elizabeth Taylor, whose eyes were to be removed and mailed to her ex-husband, Richard Burton, who was to be castrated, Frank Sinatra, who was to be skinned alive while hanging from a meat hook, and Tom Jones, whose throat was to be cut while he was engaged in a sexual act of intercourse with Miss Atkins, at knife point if necessary. For reasons still unclear, this and other information about the celebrity hit list was suppressed by Judge Charles Older during the preliminary stage of the Tate LaBianca trials. It never been focused on. I'll just read this thing out about the bottom here. Sinatra's long-standing connections with the same New Jersey branch of the Genovese family that Sebring and Rostow worked with, as well as his contact with Las Vegas mobsters linked to Frankie Carbo and the LaBiancas, inspired FBI surveillance of his business activities. Although he detested hippies and drugs, Sinatra was always on the edge of the Cielo Drive social scene, which set the context of the crimes. Sinatra, as mentioned earlier, was not only Jay Sebring's career-making patron, he was married to Mia Farrow when she was starring in Polanski's Rosemary Baby. The singer had entertained Polanski and Tate at his Palm Springs home while the film was being shot at Paramount Studios. It's at least interesting to note that the mobbed-up Robert Evans, rather than Polanski himself, was responsible for Sinatra's wife being cast in the part that made her famous. At the time, Farrow was having an affair with Polanski's friend, John Phillips, who Polanski later suspected of being his wife's murderer. When Manson revealed to the Hollywood star, Bill Dakota, he'd met Sinatra's daughter, Tina and Nancy, at Hollywood parties, Sinatra was thin-skinned enough to threaten Dakota. While these connections in themselves don't explain why Susan Atkins would know exactly where the singer lived and why they would have threatened to kill him, I believe there is more to this little explored aspect of the case than has emerged to date. Sinatra's relationship to the mob was not always smooth. In fact, several of his underworld associates conceived an aborted plan to have the mafioso's favorite crooner killed. Adding to the confusion is that Manson has always named Sinatra as one of the singers he admired as a young man in the 40s and 50s. And his admission that he was on the fringes of Frankie's baby's social scene, meaning his children. It's never been focused on, Graham mused. That never discussed that, really. It's almost like they never wanted to talk about it. Circumstances related to the Farr document eventually led to the little-known 74 Biolsi perjury trial mentioned previously. I asked Graham if Atkins mentioned any movie for wanting to kill Sinatra and the other entertainers she mentioned. She said that Atkins told her, the world has got to know, meaning that if they went ahead through these famous people, the world would know and they would realize them as the etheric of how much they love people. In other words, when you could kill them and you had to love them, which just, I went, holy cats. I asked Graham if she ever thought there was anything contrived or artificial about the manner of Atkins' confession to her. She said to me that she knew how to play crazy and play like a little girl, was all Graham would say in response to the suggestion. After Atkins had related her description of the murder, she had already occurred that her plans for those said that she were to come. Graham didn't know what to do. I'm going to call the jailhouse snitch. I'm going to get killed, she called, thinking just about how both her and Ronnie Howard and her contracted the authorities about the Atkins confession. I'll just say this, Graham said. I don't want to create any more problems than there already are. I'm the one who told Ronnie originally after Susan Atkins happened to talk to me. Ronnie happened to be in the same dorm. I hadn't seen Ronnie for a few years, and by that time she had married my ex-husband. And I called Ronnie to the side and I started telling her, and these are my words. I went, Ronnie, I can't believe this. That crazy bitch, excuse my English, she just told me that crazy bitch just told me she killed Sharon Tate, which of course she didn't, and all this. And she said, you're kidding. And I said, no, I wish she hadn't told me. She says, I'll meet you after court in the rec room. I took a shower and told her to blow my blow, everything that Atkins told me. And she goes, wow, like that. What are you going to do? And I said, I don't know. At this point in time, I had no idea. It's too much for me. A few days went by and I still had retained somewhat of a relationship with Atkins. And so finally they decided to violate me and my charge and send me to Corona on a more secure women's prison. When I was getting ready to leave, Ronnie asked, what are you going to do? I don't know what to do at the moment. I'm not going to say anything. I'm going to have to review this in my head. My world to her were, if you want to pursue this, it's up to you. Go for it. Like that. And that was the last conversation with Ronnie. And the next day I went for it. Graham later learned that Ronnie Howard contracted the prison staff the same day to sell the same story to the Cielo Drive killings, which he now claimed to have heard from Atkins directly. Graham believed that while Howard had been spoken to Atkins to confirm this of the story, the bulk of what she testified about them being taken from Graham's own account of Atkins' confession. Bugliosi put me on the stand first, Graham said. Ronnie was sketchy. The reason I'm reluctant on that is that Ronnie's testimony would have been hearsay. I had a feeling that she might have seen something that she thought she could work on for the authorities, which I did not know if she ever did. Graham also insisted that despite her own cooperation with the police, she was given no favors and served about 4 or 5 months in Corona prison. And I want to make this clear. I never got a deal. No one ever offered me anything. At the time of the informing of Atkins, Graham maintained she was unaware of the $25,000 reward. She added, Ronnie never let a buck go by her if it was possible. And with my ex-husband, I can assure you she might have pushed it. What was finally convinced her to break her silence, Graham recalled. I guess it was all that stuff sunk in as to what her future plans were. It was a very heavy burden, I can tell you I had. I was somewhat tearful of the time. I realized by the time that this young lady I was talking to was not a nut but a murderess and was going to continue on, and I felt I hadn't gone forward. It would be responsible. If I listened to, had nightmares, I couldn't sleep. And what finally made me go forward, because it took me a few weeks. I had a dream, and I told Bugliosi this. And in the dream, 2 people were walking toward me. It was Sharon and Tate and Jay Sebring. What BS. And they all had on white, like white robes, and it was blood all over them. And they kept saying to me, you know what you have to do? You know what you have to do. With that, I sat up straight in this bed, and in this instance, I knew without a shadow of doubt that I had to go forward. What was it just a flaky thing, she insisted. Vincent Bugliosi told me, Virginia, you were either in the wrong place at the wrong time or the right place at the right time. That's very true, and I figured the way things have happened over the years, I was just in the right place at the right time, because they were intent on murdering many, many other people. Although Graham told me she considers herself a non-religious person, the attributes this episode in her life to the intervention of a higher form, a higher force. Call it destiny, call it fate, Graham said, and here it is 40 years later and with Susan on her deathbed. I think I have a duty to tell the story as it happened. My interview with Graham took in 2008 when Atkins was still alive. She recalled that Mr. Bugliosi once said to her, just think, Virginia, of all the people in the world, Atkins talked to you, who knew all these people, but there's the way this case is. Yes, that's the way this case is. After hearing Graham and Howard's slightly differing accounts of Atkins' statements, the police realized the details had been revealed that only someone involved with the crimes could have known. For instance, Atkins mentioned the buck knife, and she left behind at Cielo Drive. The clue had been deliberately withheld from police as a control. The fact that Atkins' story blatantly contradicted forensic evidence and the chronology of gunshots and screams heard emanating from Cielo Drive that night would have also been obvious if any of the detectives assigned to the case. But by this point in the investigation, the truth was the last thing anyone involved seemed to be concerned about with. On December 4th, 1969, approximately 4 weeks after Atkins began her exclusively selective squealing to Graham, the Los Angeles Police Attorney's Office offered Atkins immunity for the death penalty if she would repeat her confession to the grand jury. Manson, Kasabian, Krenwinkel, Atkins, and Van Houten and Watson were indicted for the Tate LaBianca murders and publicly named as suspects. But even before her grand jury testimony had been heard, the basic outline of Atkins' confession to Graham was spread all over the world by the mass media. I think we're going to have to end here. This is another long chapter. So we're going to say thanks to the vinyl community and all the vinyl members. And if you like my work at all, I would love to earn your subscription.